This is the largest fraud in human history. $65 billion gone. On paper anyway. But the strangest part was never the number. It was the man. He wasn't a hustler working the edges of Wall Street. He was a former chairman of the NASDAQ stock market, an icon of the establishment, trusted by banks, by regulators, by thousands of investors who felt lucky just to get in. And the secret at the center of it all was almost insultingly simple. For years, Bernie Madoff didn't invest the money at all, not one trade. For decades, he reported smooth, dependable profits, up in good markets, up in bad ones, up almost every single month, like clockwork. That kind of consistency doesn't exist in real investing. It was the one clue sitting in plain sight the entire time for anyone willing to doubt a legend. Almost no one was. Bernard Lawrence Madoff was born in New York in 1938. He started his firm in 1960 with a few $1,000s saved from summer jobs, lifeguarding, installing sprinklers, and a small loan. He called it Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. And here's what people forget. The firm was real and it was good. Madoff was a genuine pioneer. While the old guard traded on a physical floor, shouting at one another, he bet early on computers, electronic trading that was faster and cheaper. That bet helped build the very technology behind the NASDAQ, the exchange he'd one day chair. By the 1980s and 90s, Bernie Madoff was not a fringe figure. He was Wall Street royalty, a market-making powerhouse, a former chairman of a major exchange, a man whose name alone opened doors. And that reputation was about to become the single most valuable asset in the whole scheme. Because the legitimate business sat on one floor of his Manhattan office. On another floor, the 17th, sat a second secret business that almost no one fully understood. Officially, it managed money for a select group of clients, a quiet, exclusive fund. Unofficially, it was the largest Ponzi scheme ever built. For a long time, getting into that fund was a privilege you had to be invited to earn. Madoff cultivated an air of exclusivity. He didn't chase clients, he turned people away, which only made them want in more. Country club members traded his name in whispers. Synagogues and charities handed over their endowments. For wealthy families, an account with Bernie was a sign you'd arrived. And feeding the fund were the so-called feeder funds, firms that pooled their clients' money and handed it to Madoff in bulk. They collected handsome fees for the privilege, asked remarkably few questions, and sent him billions. Entire institutions were, in effect, outsourcing their judgment to one man's reputation. There was even a detail that should have screamed. Madoff barely charged the fees a manager of his supposed genius could have demanded. To the feeders, that looked like generosity. In hindsight, it was something colder. He didn't need their fees. He needed their money, the fresh deposits that kept the whole thing breathing. Because underneath the prestige and the steady returns, there was no strategy generating any of it. The profits on those statements were typed into existence. The money clients believed was compounding safely in the market had, in many cases, simply been spent, paid out to earlier investors, or used to hold up the illusion for one more month. And no one is entirely sure when the lie began. Madoff himself claimed it started in the early 1990s. Many investigators believe it ran far longer, possibly back to the 1970s, which would mean the largest fraud in history may have operated undetected and in plain sight for 30 years or more. And here's the part that should keep a regulator awake at night. Someone did catch him. Years before the collapse, one man handed the authorities the math in writing and told them exactly what Madoff was. Keep him in mind. We'll get to what they did with it. When clients asked how he made such steady money, Madoff gave it a name: a split-strike conversion strategy. It sounded clever and technical. Buy a basket of big, safe stocks, then use options to cushion the downside. Reliable, modest, boring in a good way returns. It was a real strategy. It just wasn't the one Madoff was running. Investigators later established that in the investment advisory business, he wasn't buying those stocks. He wasn't buying the options. For years on end, he was making essentially no trades at all. What he was running was the oldest trick in finance, wearing a very expensive suit. A Ponzi scheme. New investors' money pays the returns of earlier investors. There's no engine underneath, just a flow. As long as more comes in than goes out, every statement looks wonderful, and nobody asks to see the actual stocks. because the actual stocks don't exist. To keep that believable for thousands of clients across decades, you need paperwork, mountains of it. That's what the 17th floor produced. Staff generated account statements and trade confirmations for trades that had never happened, picking prices after the fact from the historical record, so the trades always looked perfectly timed. They were, quite literally, printing a fictional version of the stock market. Much of that operation was run by a long-time Madoff lieutenant, who later admitted he'd helped fabricate the records for years. There were custom computer programs to spit out the fake trades and drawers of phony documents kept ready in case auditors ever turned up. But auditors rarely turned up. And here's why. A firm managing billions is supposed to be audited by a serious accounting operation. Madoff's investment business was signed off by a tiny shop outside New York, essentially one accountant in a small office. One man vouching for the books of the largest fund of its kind on Earth. Nobody asked how that was even possible, and the returns themselves should have been impossible to swallow. Through crashes, recessions, the dot-com collapse, markets that mauled every other investor alive, Madoff's fund just kept climbing, gently, steadily, year after year. In the real world, that pattern doesn't happen. It isn't a sign of genius. It's a sign the numbers aren't real. One man saw it instantly. Harry Markopoulos was an analyst asked by his own firm to copy Madoff's returns. He tried, and he couldn't. The numbers were mathematically impossible. He concluded Madoff was a fraud, and he didn't keep quiet. Starting in 2000, he warned the Securities and Exchange Commission, then again in 2001. Then in 2005, in a detailed memo titled "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud," the SEC looked into Madoff more than once, and more than once it walked away. The regulator was holding in its own files a written roadmap to the largest fraud in history, and the fraud ran on for years afterward. Part of the failure was just human deference. When examiners did come, they were often junior, and across the desk sat a former chairman of the NASDAQ, a pillar of the entire industry, mildly insulted to be questioned at all. It is hard to accuse a legend to his face, so mostly they didn't, and while the warnings were ignored, the money kept pouring in, and the human shape of it matters. This wasn't only hedge funds and billionaires, it was retirees who'd handed over their life savings, charities that lost their entire endowments overnight, families who trusted a man their parents had trusted, and then in 2008, the global financial crisis arrived, and a Ponzi scheme's one fatal weakness was suddenly laid bare. When markets crash, frightened people want their money out. All of it, at once. By late 2008, investors rattled by the crisis were asking Madoff to return billions of dollars, money he was supposed to have, money that plainly existed on their statements. He didn't have it. He never had. The flow had finally reversed, more going out than coming in, and nothing underneath to catch it. In December 2008, Madoff called his two sons into his apartment, and he told them the truth. The investment business, he said, was a lie. It was insolvent. It had been a Ponzi scheme for years. His sons did not cover for him. They went to the authorities. The next morning, the FBI arrived. Madoff admitted there was no innocent explanation. The largest fraud in history ended. In March 2009, Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies. He offered an apology to the victims and said he had always known this day would come. In June 2009, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison, the maximum. A statement that what he'd done was, in the court's words, extraordinarily evil. He didn't fall alone. Several employees were later convicted for helping maintain the fiction, but the heaviest cost landed on his own family. Both sons insisted they'd known nothing. It didn't spare them. One died by suicide in 2010. The other died in 2014. His wife was left stripped of almost everything, and beyond the family were the thousands, retirees, charities, families, who lost not just money, but trust itself. Madoff died in prison in 2021. He never repaid what he took. By the time he confessed, most of it was long gone. First, a number that needs fixing. The famous 65 billion was the total printed on victims' statements, including decades of profits that were never real. The actual cash people put in and lost was far lower, still one of the largest thefts in history. A court-appointed trustee spent more than a decade hunting the money. He sued the net winners, those who had withdrawn more than they invested, and clawed back billions. And it worked to a degree almost nobody predicted. In total, more than a decade later, a large portion of funds were recovered and redistributed to victims. A separate government effort also recovered billions more, including settlements with major institutions that had handled Madoff's money. Which makes Madoff a strange kind of outlier, the biggest fraud ever committed and also one of the most thoroughly clawed back. But the money was always the recoverable part. What no one could return was the rest of it, the trust. Bernie Madoff's real product was never a strategy. It was trust. The biggest lesson from the Madoff scandal isn't about money, it's about trust. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden stories behind history's most fascinating mysteries and scandals, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next investigation.